Second moral code: not to eat flesh, shunning of violence. What is flesh? First of all, let us understand the gross meaning of the term flesh. Flesh means meat, non-vegetarian diet. Pious scriptures have forbidden to consume flesh and blood of animals or birds. Even if the animals, birds or fish are killed by someone else, by consuming meat which is sinful, the consumer definitely feels violent, more or less. All the persons who commit, instigate, inspire, encourage, or support the act of violence or cruelty are all bound by the sinful karma of violence. Later on, none of them could escape the consequences of their karma. In this world, with the help of power or money, they can escape the punishment. But nobody can evade the law of karma of nature, and nobody can slip away from the punishment as per that law. In front of this law, their power, capacity, wealth, privileges, or influence are futile or useless. Thus, in the world which is created by omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, supreme God, the law of karma is constant and abiding. Here only God or his muktas can interfere, but they also do that under special circumstances only. Otherwise, they do not make unnecessary changes. Non-vegetarian diet can increase rajasic and tamasic tendencies. It can cause mental aberrations like lust, anger, enmity, jealousy, envy, hatred, inertia, etc. It can generate lack of spiritual insight and grasping power. It destroys the purity and sattvic attributes of mind. At present, violence, terrorism, hatred, disharmony, corruption, etc. are prevalent in the world on large scale, which are due to harmful addictions and non-vegetarian diet. Each and every sensible person in the society should accept this fact. If we observe the wild animals like lion, tiger, leopard, bear, etc., they look angry, furious and violent. They look restless and fierce because they are flesh-eating animals. Whereas a huge and powerful elephant, which is grass-eater, looks peaceful and quiet. This difference is due to different food habits. In Western countries, intake of non-vegetarian food and alcohol, drugs, etc. into intoxicants is more compared to our country. Therefore, Western people have more rajasic and tamasic attributes than sattvic attributes. They have progressed more in attaining worldly achievements, but as far as spiritual evolvement is concerned, they are at par with animals. They have more number of cases of free sex, licentiousness, violence, adultery, assault, rape, theft, etc. in their society. In our country also, crimes like murder, rape, assault are committed under the influence of alcohol, etc., addictions and non-vegetarian food. This is found out by the researchers. Rate of crime is lower among the societies where people are vegetarian and living religious and pious life. Many people consider themselves belonging to higher class of the society. They adopt non-vegetarian diet and intoxicants as a fashionable lifestyle. They consider vegetarian people as old-fashioned, weak and vain. They get addicted to non-vegetarian food and intoxicants and commit various types of crimes like violence, adultery, rape, theft, cheating, kidnapping, exploitation of poor, gambling, etc. They consider this as their achievement, but they do not realize that along with themselves, they are misleading their next generation also towards destruction and hopeless future. It is too late when they realize their mistake in old age. or on their deathbed. Their children also despise them. They are left alone with dejection, remorse, and frustration. Now Westerners also are fed up with materialism and are attracted towards our spirituality. They are longing for mental peace, and we ignore our glorious heritage and do not hesitate to imitate their lifestyle, which is totally devastating. This is really shameful. Western people respect our Indian culture and are adopting meditation techniques, yoga, devotion, classical music, art, literature, etc. to attain peace of mind. They are giving up addictions and non-vegetarian food and adopting vegetarian lifestyle. This is really significant fact. Some people believe that non-vegetarian food can make their bodies strong and healthy. They also believe that people having non-vegetarian food are stronger than the people having vegetarian food. This is not at all true because scientists have proved that peanuts are more nutritious than eggs or meat. Non-vegetarian people also forget that brutal instincts resulting from non-vegetarian food leads towards barbarism. Western sports like freestyle wrestling, karate, boxing, etc. display nothing but violent instincts. It looks as if two bulls are fighting. Any thoughtful person would notice mere barbaric instincts. Only material growth is not the real growth for humanity, because it is certain that material growth is not permanent. Sooner or later, it diminishes. Spiritual evolvement of consciousness, higher state of consciousness, progress on the path of salvation, etc. are the indications of real growth for humanity. Spiritual evolvement of consciousness can never be destroyed. Therefore, it is the real evolution. There was an interesting report on mad cow syndrome. It mentioned that raw meat contains certain viruses which cannot be destroyed even while cooking. These viruses can cause a number of diseases. Sick animals are given heavy doses of antibiotics. People who are consuming meat of such animals also get the side effects of these medicines. So, when they are sick, heavy doses of antibiotics do not cure them. In the end, such patients die miserably. Scientists have found out that when an animal is slaughtered, it is frightened, and certain hormones are released from its endocrine glands into blood. For example, hormones like adrenaline, non-adrenaline, cortisol, etc. are released into the blood. By consuming such meat which is full of toxins, the eater develops various mental abnormalities and psychosomatic diseases. Each and every living being on this earth has equal right to live. As per ecological science, every living being is a part of great natural cycle. By destroying or interrupting this cycle, ecological equilibrium is disrupted. As a result, the frequency of natural calamities and natural disasters increase, which we are facing quite often. As per law of karma, when an animal is killed and its flesh is eaten, sin is accumulated for this violent deed. It has been mentioned in Bhagavad Gita that karmanam gahanam gatihi. Concept of karma is inexplicable. All the karmas, good or bad, are recorded by the spiritual power of God, which is prevalent everywhere. Binding karmas adhere to the causal body of a soul in the form of inherent qualities. A soul has to go through the consequences of his karma. When an innocent animal is being killed, its consciousness experiences unbearable pain. When the consciousness of an animal leaves the body, it realizes that some particular person has killed it. Therefore, it curses the killer out of misery. The killer and all those people who helped, encouraged or consented the act of killing, and the person who consumed the meat of the animal. All of them have to suffer the consequences. Due to killing, the animal has to die before its time, so its soul has to be born once again as an animal. Thus, the killer creates hindrance in evolution of a soul and accumulates the sin. The meat eater also develops demonic qualities. A meat eater could definitely lose his desire to eat non-vegetarian food if he could imagine himself in place of the animal which is killed and try to think seriously about the pain of that animal at the time of being killed. Meat eaters should try out this technique with total emotional involvement. This technique is really useful for those who want to give up non-vegetarian food and adopt vegetarian lifestyle. Some people also argue that plants are also living beings, just like birds and animals. So by eating vegetarian food also, we are committing violence. So we must be accumulating sin. The response to such baseless argument is that God has created nutritious and nourishing plants through Mother Nature, which are eatable and beneficial for our physical growth. Here also, scriptures have forbidden the vegetarian food, which increases Rajasic and Tamasic tendencies and creates imbalance in body and mind. Therefore, it is necessary to have properly balanced vegetarian food. For example, as per some doctors and Vaidyas, plants like onion, garlic, etc. have some medicinal properties which are useful for body, but they are very harmful for mental and spiritual well-being. For example, garlic is helpful in diseases related to heart, but it also generates Rajasic and Tamasic qualities in mind, which generates desires to enjoy sensual pleasures and also increases stress and anger. Its overall effect is more harmful for heart as well as for total well-being of a person. It also creates obstacles on the path of spiritual progress. Some people also try to prove their points in unfair manner, that if it is not eatable, why nature has created it? Nature has also created cactus and other poisonous plants, but nobody eats these plants because they could be dangerous for life. Therefore, such arguments are useless. God has given us insight to differentiate between meaningful and meaningless, proper, improper. We must utilize it. Therefore, it is appropriate to have only that vegetarian food which would generate sattvic attributes in mind and nourishes the body. Creator of all, Supreme Lord has decided that man must have vegetarian food. Therefore, such food is not objectionable. Natural formation of mouth and teeth of a man is appropriate for vegetarian food only. Formation of mouth and teeth of wild animals like lion, tiger, wolf, leopard, cheetah, etc. is different and appropriate for non-vegetarian food. By having vegetarian food, sattvic attributes are developed gradually. One's inner conscience is also purified and develops sattvic attributes, and its capacity to understand subtle spiritual principles increases. Purification of conscience depends on pure food. When conscience is purified, its dullness decreases and grasping power increases. Once spiritual principles are understood clearly, spiritual evolvement of consciousness accelerates. Eating vegetarian food is not considered as violence towards plants because consciousness of plants is not fully developed. So plants are almost non-living objects. They do not experience pain while we cut them. Also, intellect, insight, or various emotions are not developed in plant consciousness. They undergo only external growth naturally. Some scientists have observed that plants can feel certain kind of sound waves created by music, as well as they can feel certain kind of touch. Plants definitely have soul, so naturally they can feel the effect of sound waves or touch. But this does not prove that they can experience pain also, just like animals. Because consciousness in a plant is not sufficiently developed to experience happiness or pain, it is possible that sound waves or touch can create certain vibrations in plants. But we cannot say that they experience pain when we cut them, or they experience peace and happiness when we caress them. In fact, sound waves of music can create vibrations in the atoms of non-living objects also. Some people also argue that even milk is an animal product. It is developed from the various nutrients in animals' blood. Therefore, milk should not be consumed. Milk should also be considered as non-vegetarian food, just like eggs. As an egg contains protein, carbohydrates, etc., nutrients, milk also contains similar nutrients. Therefore, both the products should be considered as non-vegetarian food. This is a misconception because milk is produced due to affection and emotions of a mother towards her child. Here, a mother does not experience pain, but experiences love and affection. It is a totally sattvic food. It is the first food for a newborn baby. We also drink milk of cow, buffalo, she-goat, etc. and we have a right to do that. Because man has been protecting and raising these animals for thousands of years, these animals have become a part of human civilization for thousands of years. By raising and protecting these animals, man has achieved the right to use their milk. After providing sufficient milk for their calves, man can utilize remaining milk. Egg is produced as a byproduct of sexual feelings of a bird. There is a possibility of developing it into a baby bird. So, eating an egg is linked to violence. Also, egg as food generates rajasic and tamasic tendencies. Its intake flares up lust, anger, etc., intense passionate feelings. Modern scientists also say that certain components of egg raise the level of cholesterol in the blood as compared to milk. Some people try to convince that the eggs which are fertilized artificially could be considered as vegetarian eggs. This is not appropriate because in this process also, a bird suffers. The bird anticipates naturally that the bird will come out of the egg, so its feelings are hurt, which could be considered as violence. An egg is alive, whereas milk is not alive. It is a misconception that the egg which is not fertilized is vegetarian. Because soul is present in latent state and it is not possible to verify through microscope if there is soul present in the egg or not. Because a soul cannot be observed using any physical instrument. Thus, an egg should be classified as non-vegetarian food. Similarly, fish, crab, earthworms, etc. are non-vegetarian food. Also, grains, pulses, fruits, sweets, dry fruits, etc. should be considered as non-vegetarian food if they are not cleaned properly and contain insects, etc. Consumption of unstrained water, milk, ghee, oil, etc. is as bad as consuming non-vegetarian food. Therefore, such substances should be cleaned properly before using them. Food should be prepared with pure and pious body and mind and should be offered to God. Then it should be eaten remembering God and having a peaceful mind. By offering food and other objects to God with full devotion, omnipresent God manifests into idol form and accepts the devotion of a devotee and blesses the food with his divine sight and makes the food pious. Therefore, food and other objects reduce their rajasic or tamasic qualities and they become pure and sattvic. This is the secret of offering food to God before having it. Cooked food available in the market which is not prepared hygienically, and food bought by the money which is earned by cheating, hurting somebody, or by deceitful means are also as harmful as meat. Medicine given by dubious doctor or vaidya, or medicine which is mixed with alcohol or meat, should not be taken. Here the term dubious implies that the medicine which has been prepared by a Vaidya who is immoral and having bad conduct and who has prepared medicine to fulfill his selfish motive or to earn money through hypocrisy or by cheating the patient should not be consumed. Consumption of such medicine should also be considered as consumption of meat. It is not appropriate to take the medicine given by a Vaidya or a doctor who is not trustworthy, except during some emergency or under unavoidable circumstances. Such medicines may improve physical health, but mental health is jeopardized. That means mind becomes corrupt, which is not advisable for a seeker. At times, we have to take help from hospitals, nursing homes, and unknown doctors to treat various types of ailments which is required as per time and place. After undergoing such treatments, penance and worship to God can be performed for purification. If possible, it is appropriate to get the reference of good doctors or Vaidyas and consult them. Our body is not the door leading to hell. It is the best medium to attain salvation. Therefore, it should be looked after like a temple of God. It is an insult to ignore our well-being, and it is harmful also. Thus, giving up non-vegetarian food is the gross apparent meaning of second moral code of conduct, which is shunning the violence. Now, let us understand the subtle meaning. Renouncement of violence does not mean to give up physical violence only. Here, all kinds of subtle violence which could be performed through thought, act, or speech are indicated. For example, to be angry out of jealousy, hatred, or just to satisfy one's ego or to injure someone or hurt someone. It is violence to hurt somebody physically or emotionally, to fulfill one's selfish motives or due to some mental perversion, to tell lies, speak abusive words, use vulgar language, or to hurt someone's feelings by cursing him or her, to think bad about someone, to think or act to harm someone are all acts of violence. It is also violence to declare somebody's secret to fulfill one's selfish motive, or out of jealousy or hatred, to accuse someone who is innocent, to speak truth which could offend someone, or which could harm someone, to hurt someone emotionally through unpleasant, contemptuous and harsh speech, to violate the rules of hygiene out of lethargy and invite disease, to indulge into impure and inappropriate fun and frolic, excessive enjoyment of sexual and sensual pleasures, to work more than one's capacity, to roam around at unhygienic places without any purpose, to eat unhygienic food, to pass on one's infectious diseases to someone else out of negligence are various types of violence. To hurt one's own self by spoiling body and mind through intoxicants and ill habits, to deviate others forcibly towards intoxicants and ill habits are also violence. To embarrass or make fun of someone, to derogate or humiliate someone in a group or society, to treat someone in such a way that he or she develops inferiority complex, to find faults in someone though he is not faulty, etc., are all acts of violence. To throw garbage in the house, outside the house, in the compound, gardens, on the road or in any public place, to excrete, spit anywhere and spread pollution of dirt, to spread noise pollution by making unnecessary noise in rude and improper manner, by spreading commotion, by playing radio, TV, tape recorder in full volume, by dancing on loud music, to spread air pollution by smoking bidi, cigarette, tobacco, by using certain poisonous chemical and fuels, to spread air and water pollution by certain chemical factories, by ignoring the laws, etc., are various types of violence. To misuse power and authority, to stretch the limits of one's dominion, to give one's word about something and not to fulfill it, to disobey one's commitment, etc., are also acts of violence. To discourage, depress, or demoralize someone through unenthusiastic speech, to torture someone physically or mentally by scaring him or her, are also acts of violence. To demand dowry from bride's family, to burden them, etc., are acts of violence from groom's side. To become a burden by staying at some place as a guest for a long time, to pay less than what was promised, to make someone toil, to exploit someone physically, mentally, or financially, etc., are acts of violence. Treachery towards one's country, to damage national property, smuggling, black marketing, tax evasion, corruption, etc., are also acts of violence. To make someone slave through power of money, authority, rights, or influence, to oppress someone with the help of anti-social elements or police, are acts of violence. It is violence to discourage a seeker on spiritual path who is performing various means to attain salvation by talking in pessimistic manner. It is violence to misguide someone and make him perform very hard and inhuman rigid austerity, recitation, fast, penance, sublimation of bodily passion, or keeping him awake at night. Body should not be treated as a door to hell, but it should be treated as a temple of God, and it should be looked after with care. Cultivating such understanding is non-violence. It is violence to praise, admire, or flatter somebody in excessive degree who is not virtuous by getting carried away by emotions, affection, or obligation, or to accomplish one's own selfish motive. Because such superficial praise satisfies his ego, so he becomes more conceited and arrogant and misbehaves and spoils his own and others' life. To create hatred and enmity among people because of one's own jealousy and malice and make them fight. To flare up communalism or casteism by spreading rumors are types of violence. It is violence if a doctor or Vaidya misguides a patient, charges more money by prescribing improper or unnecessary medicines or treatment, or if a lawyer or a judge convicts an innocent by false arguments or faulty judgments. A human should never be killed by any means. This has been emphasized by Bhagwan Swaminarayan. Because in this world, human incarnation is the highly evolved physical manifestation of soul consciousness. Human body is considered rarely available to deities also, because spiritual evolvement of consciousness is possible only in human beings. Therefore, killing of a human being is the biggest violence and the biggest sin. Some scriptures have allowed to kill an oppressive person or a sinner. They do not consider it as an act of violence, but this concept is not totally appropriate, because it is more appropriate to give him a chance to correct his ways through counseling than punishing him. Through proper guidance, he can transform from Valia robber to sage Valmiki. Therefore, killing a human being is a bigger sin compared to violence of any other living being, and its consequences are far more severe. It is violence to take advantage of simplicity or innocence of ladies, children, or youth, and force them or trick them into committing immoral deeds, or to exploit them sexually, physically, mentally, or financially. It is violence to listen cowardly when someone makes derogatory remarks about saint, mukta, or God himself, or criticizes or insults them. If one is not capable of stopping him, then he must move away from there, but he should not tolerate such irreligious activity. In spite of being capable, if someone does not stop or restrain a sinner from committing sin and remains a witness to such sinful deed or tolerates such misbehavior, then it is violence. because such behavior indicates indirect consent to a sinner in committing sin. For example, when Duryodhan and Dushasan pulled Draupadi's clothes, Bhishma Pita was present there and he was also able to stop, but he did not protest. Thus, to justify, sanction or agree silently with someone who is performing sin due to affection or obligation towards him is also a violence. To donate one's wife, to sell small girls, to sell one's own children, to perform child marriages, to force one's children into marriage, to force small children to work, etc., are various types of violence. Now, government has also declared child labor as illegal. It is violence to attempt suicide or hurt or injure oneself in case one's reputation is damaged. One is insulted. One has failed in some undertaking. One has some physical, mental, financial or spiritual confusion. Or one has committed some inappropriate deed. If other people also feel inspired by one's inappropriate or immoral conduct and imitate it, then it is also considered violence. Bhagwan Swaminarayan has mentioned in Shiksha Patri that mistakes committed by great people or saints should not be imitated, because all great saints are not perfect. Therefore, there is a possibility of committing mistakes by them also. It is violence to live in a place out of attachment, where there is a possibility of losing one's life or wealth, harassment from king, possibility of spreading some epidemic, danger to one's life, bad and unfavorable circumstances which could harm one's reputation. Under such adverse conditions, it is advisable to shift to some peaceful and happy place and worship God happily. One should not prolong one's stay under unfavorable circumstances. A mukta who is self-realized as well as God-realized and who has attained divine state do not get distracted from their divine state by place or time, etc. So, this statement cannot be applied to such muktas, but it is valid for those whose conviction is not firm enough and who have not attained divine state of being. The most subtle form of violence is the suicidal tendency of one's consciousness, which gets distracted from the path of truth and God realization, and gets attracted towards sensual pleasures and bad conduct by the mind and senses, and attains disgrace. It is futile to be born as a human being if we cannot attain unity with divine form of God, because it is difficult to obtain human birth even for deities. Therefore, this is the biggest and most subtle form of violence. Ahimsa paramo dharma. Thus, to renounce various types of gross and subtle forms of violence and to strictly follow non-violence by keeping all the senses under control is considered as proper observance of the second moral code of conduct, which is shunning of violence. Third moral code: never commit a theft, stealing. What is stealing? First of all, let us understand the gross meaning of stealing. Stealing means to snatch, swindle, possess or use any of the objects like money, grains, ornaments, jewels, clothes, vehicle, land, wealth, fruits or flowers secretly or against the will of the owner. Causes and consequences. There are a lot of factors and elements responsible for an immoral act like stealing. The main reasons are attraction, inducement, greed, temptation, endearment, and enchantment for the object, attitude of hoarding and lack of availability, etc. Tendency to show off and lack of availability are main reasons responsible for stealing. There are other powerful factors instrumental in stealing, which are tendency to imitate, scarcity, unavailability, discontent, financial problem, lack of means of entertainment, tendency to gain easily, and more without putting in more efforts, ignorance, illiteracy, lack of moral values, bad company, etc. A person who steals and all those persons who inspire, encourage, consent, support, compel, help, defend or conceal the act of stealing and utilize the objects acquired through stealing are the culprits, and all of them have to suffer the consequences of the act of stealing. When a small child steals a small object for the first time from the neighborhood, school or a shop, and his parents, guardians or elders, instead of scolding him, try to encourage, ignore or hide the act of stealing, the child becomes fearless and enthusiastic to repeat the act of stealing. Later on, he develops the bad habit of stealing. Gradually, as he grows up, he learns to commit bigger thefts, and he experiences perverse joy out of such bad habit. He begins to believe that to commit the act of stealing is a brave task. Therefore, he tries to be efficient in the art of stealing and becomes a big thief. Then it becomes very difficult to reform him. As per the saying, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. It is very difficult to reform such seasoned criminals. Along with the habit of stealing, he develops vices like violent tendencies, adultery, harmful addiction, etc. Therefore, it is advisable and unavoidable to stop a child right from the childhood from performing sins like stealing, etc. By explaining him properly, and if required, he could be punished slightly along with firm attitude. There is a law to punish a person who has committed theft. If a thief is caught red-handed, people gathered around him to beat him up. Then the thief has to bear the beatings of police and he would be confined to jail. This is gross punishment for stealing. Stain karma na kartavyam dharma dharmapi kenachit, as quoted in the Shikshapatri. God and his saints say that theft should not be committed even to perform religious deeds. Some ignorant people believe that by donating a small part as charity from the wealth acquired by cheating, swindling or stealing, accumulated sins would be destroyed. Then it is appropriate to use the wealth for material comforts and enjoyments. This is a wrong concept because religious deeds performed using stolen money converts into irreligious or sinful deeds. Act of stealing is a sin. So how could a religious deed be accomplished by committing an irreligious act? If this logic is understood, a person wouldn't feel temptation to steal to perform a religious deed. Consequences of such sinful act should be suffered. There is no doubt that stealing performed to accomplish some religious deed is more sinful than any other act of stealing. So its consequences are more severe. The owner of the object which has been stolen also curses the thief. Maybe he worked hard to obtain that object. If the owner also obtained the object through some wrong means, then the thief of that object has to undergo the consequences for both of them. That is, consequences of the stealing committed by him, as well as consequences of some unethical act committed by the owner of the object. Thus, the law of karma is very complicated. If this concept is understood properly, anybody would think twice before performing any act and he could be saved from accumulating sin. There are a lot of disadvantages of stealing, which are physical and mental punishment, stigma in society, loss of respect and reputation, etc. By the act of stealing, moral strength, independence, piousness, etc. are destroyed, and due to such perversion, one's consciousness attains descent or deteriorates. Now let us understand the subtle meaning of stealing. To misuse one's post or power to collect bribe money or gifts is considered as stealing, even though the officer is going to help in accomplishing certain tasks or he is going to be helpful in any manner. Some officers demand bribe to accomplish other people's work and misuse their post, privilege, or power. They consider bribe money as the compensation or fees to accomplish the work. They try to convince themselves, thinking that it is just an allowance or remuneration, but not the bribe. Thus, they make futile efforts to believe that they are not doing anything wrong, even though they may be feeling guilty within. But it certainly is an act of stealing. There are various types of stealing. For example, evading taxes like income tax, sales tax, octroi, etc. By ignoring the ethics of business and employing various tricks like dishonesty, corruption, smuggling, etc. to gain undue benefits by breach of trust, to capture someone's deposits or security, which were assigned out of trust to be looked after. To use the objects for personal use which are forgotten by someone, to pick up and retain the things lying on the road which belong to someone else, etc. There is always a possibility of committing mistake while performing some task. There is a saying that to err is human. It is not a crime to commit mistake. But it is a crime not to accept one's mistakes with humility and not to amend one's mistakes after accepting them. It is stealing. To hoard or accumulate food, grains, or other objects unnecessarily is also an act of stealing, because a person who accumulates does not utilize them and other needy people are deprived of the necessities. Therefore, accumulating things unnecessarily is also a type of stealing. Bhagwan Swaminarayan has mentioned about storing the grain and money, etc. in Shiksha Patri, but it is also made clear that the object should be stored as per requirements in the household. He has not mentioned to hoard out of proportion. Therefore, one should honestly assess one's requirements and accumulate accordingly. By piling up perishable objects like food items or other such items are spoiled, then they are of no use to anybody. They are to be discarded as garbage. This is a loss. Human tendency to amass black money or wealth is harmful for the society as well as the nation. Amassing wealth unnecessarily is useless and other people cannot reap the benefits of such wealth. A person who has collected a lot of money feels deeply attached to his money, and such attachment creates obstacles in attaining emancipation after death. Accumulated money which cannot be used for noble cause creates a lot of problems and distress, as stagnant water in a puddle gets polluted and stinks and cannot be used for any purpose. But flowing water of springs and rivers do not get spoiled due to movement, and it could be used for a lot of purpose. If a person doesn't utilize his knowledge or skills for the betterment of society, means if a person does not teach his knowledge or skills in spite of being learned and scholar, this is subtle kind of stealing. Therefore, knowledge and skills should always be taught to eligible students. Teaching is the best form of contribution among all types of donations. It is well known that a lot of skills and art forms of our country have become extinct due to unwillingness to impart knowledge. Learned people hesitate to share their knowledge due to the fear that if other people learn their skills, then their fame, reputation, glory and financial gain also would be shared by other people. Sometimes, jealousy and envy also play an important role. Therefore, ignorance and mental darkness spread in the society cannot be eradicated. If all the knowledge inherited by our country is spread in proper way, ignorance could be wiped out and our nation could proceed quickly on the path of progress. Let us pray to God that our country attains such auspicious opportunity. These days, shopkeepers and adulterators sell their products at high price, or they sell lower quality goods at high price, saying that they are of good quality. Thus, they cheat the consumers and rob them. For example, the milkman mixes water in milk. Petrol pump owner adds diesel, solvent or kerosene in petrol. Ready-made cooking spices are mixed with the colored husk. Eatables are also contaminated. Medicines are contaminated. Everywhere there is adulteration and contamination. These days, fake milk and fake ghee are also available. Goldsmith steals the gold and mixes copper or some other metal. Tailor takes away good cloth for his own use. These are various types of stealing. To project oneself more virtuous is stealing in form of hypocrisy. To boast about the deeds performed by oneself, to exaggerate or to praise oneself, etc., are also forms of stealing. It is stealing not to be helpful to others, in spite of being physically, mentally, or financially capable. To be selfish, to be self-centered, or not to serve one's parents, guru, ill people, people in distress, or needy people as per one's capacity. To travel by railway or bus without buying a ticket, or to enter the places without buying ticket, where it is required to buy tickets, are forms of stealing. During examination, students use various methods of copying. This is obviously stealing. To hide the truth, to accomplish one's selfish motives, to hide one's weaknesses or drawbacks, or try to convince others that one's drawbacks are actually virtues and not the drawbacks, etc., are subtle forms of stealing. Gambling, speculation, etc., improper and unethical means of earning money, are also acts of stealing. Not to offer a part of one's earnings or wages or time to serve and please God is stealing. Our earnings or wages are purified by offering a part of it to God. By using such purified earnings, one's conscience is purified, and God is pleased, and one attains salvation. To have food selfishly without feeding one's servants and dependents is also stealing. Not to fulfill one's obligations, responsibilities faithfully in attending one's job, profession, and business or in service to society and nation is subtle form of stealing. Not to perform one's duties honestly is also a subtle form of stealing. To conceal or hide one's sinful or malicious deeds in front of God or His muktas is a very subtle form of stealing. To misuse the name of God or the name of God's mukta to fulfill one's selfish motives, to mislead someone or to inspire someone to commit sin by quoting the statements in the name of a saint, which have never been spoken by the saint, are subtle forms of stealing. To copy an article, creation, research, or invention without the permission or willingness of the creator and declare it as one's original creation is an act of stealing. To imitate a saint and copy his speech and behavior without having virtues like him is subtle form of stealing. To accept and enjoy a gift out of greed or attachment which has been given by someone willingly, lovingly, or respectfully is also considered as stealing. To consume food or any other object without offering it to God with full devotion is also a type of stealing. Lack of faith, conviction, atheism towards God and His muktas, their divine form or teachings, is subtle form of stealing. All the vices like greed or attachment towards worldly objects, narrow-mindedness, acute desire for worldly objects, greediness, miserly attitude, etc., are included in the definition of stealing. Thus, any form of stealing, either gross or subtle, creates mental distress. It affects the purity of mind and makes it impure. Freedom of mind is lost and mind becomes slave of vices. Spiritual progress of consciousness is hindered as inner purity is lost and one's consciousness attains descent. Therefore, to renounce gross and subtle forms of stealing through thought, action, and speech, and to remain constantly aware so that it is not performed unknowingly, is the real observance of Third Moral Code of Conduct.